everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour, your weekly dose of inspiration, creativity, and connection. Each week, we welcome a new guest who shares fresh ideas, helpful tips, and sparks a little something new in our photography. If you'd like to stay in the loop, sign up for our newsletter at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. Tonight's guest is Josh Galicki. Josh is a wildlife photographer known for his breathtaking bird imagery and artistic approach to nature photography. He has a gift for capturing fleeting, intimate moments with wildlife, often using dramatic light, unique perspectives, and environmental storytelling to elevate his images beyond documentation. Josh is an award-winning wildlife photographer whose work has been recognized by Bird Photographer of the Year, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Big Picture Natural World Photography Competition, among many others. Whether he's photographing from his kayak on the Chesapeake Bay or traveling far from home in search of rare birds and wildlife, Josh brings patience, precision, and passion to every frame. His photographs not only celebrate the beauty of the natural world, but also serve as a quiet call to conservation. You can connect with Josh through his website at joshuagalicki.com, and you can find him on Instagram at Galicki_photography. And be sure to check out the Wildlife Photography Podcast, which he co-hosts with fellow photographer Rob Reed. In tonight's presentation, learn to incorporate space into your wildlife photography. Josh will share his approach to creating impactful images by using space effectively, along with tips on making the most of your gear and conditions in the field. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Josh.
Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate the kind words, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. It's an honor to be here. I have to say that. Since we spoke some time ago about this chat, I've explored the channel and listened to so many of the conversations and how it started during the pandemic and bringing everybody together. And it's great positive conversation, great cross collaboration. We need that. We need lots of positivity. So thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
I am thrilled that you said yes. So I'm actually very tickled that you are here. And
My pleasure.
yeah, so if you want to get, if I, in my introduction, I just say what I want to say. So if I've missed or glossed over something that you want to insert, please feel free to take the moment to introduce yourself if I missed something.
Yeah, sure. No, that was a great summary. Again, Josh Galicki. I was born and raised in northeastern Pennsylvania, so I grew up loving birds since I was a kid. So I guess I would call myself a birder first before I was a photographer. I would go out and, put together all these checklists and show family and friends, hey, I saw this, this, and this. And it wasn't until I got my first camera and I started taking pictures and showing pictures of these birds, whether it's the Blackburnian warbler and whatnot, where folks really started taking interest. Wow, that's an interesting bird, or that's a beautiful bird. And since then, I've been just attached to my camera. Wildlife photography is a passion of mine. I've, of course, moved from Pennsylvania. I was based in Washington, D.C. for many years. But over the past couple of years, I relocated. I'm on the eastern shore of Maryland, which is fantastic for birds. There's some mammals here too, and I'll also try to travel as much as I can to photograph whenever possible. I'm a lifelong student at this. I think we all are when it comes to photography. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially me. I co-host a podcast with Rob Reed. He's a good friend of mine. Rob started the Bird Photographer of the Year contest some years ago, about 10 years ago. And after starting that contest, I got to know him through the contest, and he started the Wild Art Photographer of the Year, and we collaborated together. And then since then, we eventually started the podcast, which we love to just chat about all things wildlife photography. So if any of you haven't checked out the podcast, please subscribe. Hopefully you'll like it.
Yep. Yep. All right. With that, I'm going to give you the screen and you can start your presentation if you'd like.
Great, fantastic. So what we're going to talk about tonight is incorporating space in wildlife photography. When it comes to wildlife photography, generally speaking, most imagery, it's putting the animal primarily in the frame. So the animal dominates the frame, and they're mostly diagnostic shots, or what we would say literal shots. Whether it's a shot of, whatever type of animal, they're dominating the composition, and you're normally using rule of thirds, putting the animal, in a pleasing manner within the frame. However, over the years, some people call these environmental portraits. I like to call it space because when it comes to incorporating space in your photography, it doesn't always have to be a grand vista. What you see here, that's actually a bison in Lamar Valley I took some years ago. This, of course, is a grand vista, but it doesn't always have to be a grand vista. It could be just a couple of feet or it could be several miles. And we're going to talk about using space in your wildlife photography to make your compositions even more interesting. So that's going to be the purpose of the conversation tonight. And here we are. So here's the agenda. We were just talking about my background, so I'll kind of gloss over that slide. But what we'll start talking about is the importance of using space in wildlife photography. And what I'm going to do after that is show some examples of how I incorporate space in my imagery. There's several different methods to do it. I'll give you a breakdown of my methods and how I compose them and the different opportunities that I have in the field to incorporate space in the photography. Also, we're going to do some myth busting too, because a lot of people, again, when they think of space in wildlife photography or environmental portraits, they think these grand vistas, and it's not necessarily the case. It's a relative term, and there's a lot of variability when it comes to incorporating space. This, by the way, in the background is a coyote running through Hayden Valley in Yellowstone, a balmy -26 after 0 degrees. It all feels the same anyhow. So we just talked about this is my website, as Linda mentioned, my Instagram. In addition to having some success in photography competitions over the years, by the way, I will say most of the success that I have had, it's with wildlife photos that incorporate space, actually, and you'll see some of those images. Also, I'm a photo contest judge. I judge for Photo Crowd. It's a large photo contest based out of the United Kingdom. One Island, I've judged for the Australian Bird Photographer of the Year and some other contests as well. This has helped me exponentially. Being a judge, I get to see some of the best photos come in across the world from some of the best photographers. So not only is it a humbling experience for me, it's helped improve my photography significantly over the years. So very honored to be part of some of these photo contests. And also, again, I co-host the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed. The link is here. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and hopefully it'll be of interest and you'll learn some things through it. We talk about all kinds of great stuff, and Rob has a really great English accent, and it smooths out my Northeastern American accent. Okay, so let's talk about the input. And by the way, as we go through these and the images, and when I'm describing my approach to some of the pictures, feel free to just, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them into the chat or ask away. And, better to take them, while it's fresh in your head. And of course, we'll save some time at the end. So when it comes to the importance of using space and wildlife imagery, again, as I was saying, standard frame filling shots of wildlife have become almost too common. And in many cases, they've become, frankly, boring for when it comes to wildlife photography because there's just so many images. While it's great to take and it's, satisfying to come across an animal and take that image, when it comes to pushing the envelope and when it comes to expressing a more powerful image, using space and having a little bit more room in your frame, it's extremely important and it makes those images more significant. If you look over the past couple of years, these types of images can tell stories and do many other things. In addition, conservation imagery is a part of this, or I would call it potentially a subcategory of space. Conservation photography over the past couple of years has become huge because of obviously the decline in wildlife populations, the convergence of wildlife with the human expansion across the globe. So these images are much more powerful, in my opinion. And it's something to have in your toolkit also when you're out in the field. You want to take images, I think, that move people and that are much more powerful. In my opinion, incorporating space adds power to your photography. Also, if you're selling images, in my opinion, and looking at, it's very hard now when it comes to print stock images, just in light of everything's online and AI is going to do just more and more, I think, damage to that industry. But when it comes to selling photographs, images with space, environmental portraits, they just sell more too, because I think they're more appealing, especially to the photography audience that isn't really steeped in wildlife or necessarily just attracted just for the wildlife. Sometimes I'll sell my images and make prints for folks, and they're not even interested in the animal in the frame. They're interested in just the scene that the animal's in. So they're looking at it more from an artistic perspective versus just what that particular animal is. In some cases, again, they don't even care. So they sell more. Also, incorporating space means you're incorporating additional elements into your photography. It makes the compositions much more complex. So instead of, let's say, having a bird on a stick with an out of focus background and it's kind of a monotone out of focus background, if you're taking that same bird and maybe you're shooting it with a wider perspective and maybe there's trees around it, you have sky, there's additional elements in there. And essentially, it can almost be a landscape composition, but it's more complex and it requires a very trained eye over time to improve that. You have to work the edges, and we'll go through that as I go through some of the examples that I have in the slide deck. Much more complex when it comes to the compositions. Also, I think one other thing that's very important, and we've talked about this on the podcast before with Rob, when it comes to wildlife photography, it is very expensive. If you're buying a super telephoto lens, a 600 millimeter lens, an 800 millimeter lens, I mean, you could buy a car, a cheaper car, frankly, than what some of these lenses cost. In many ways, the expense for all this gear has become a significant barrier, especially if you want to shoot just specifically with these super telephotos. It becomes a barrier for a lot of folks who want to get in and get involved simply because of the expense. If you're shooting with wider perspectives, the shorter the focal length, generally speaking, the more affordable and the cheaper the gear is. So there's not a significant price tag in terms of entering the wildlife photography space if you're shooting wide. The kits are much more affordable, which I think is great because I think when it comes to wildlife photography or anything else, you want to bring as many people in to appreciate this, and there shouldn't be strong barriers to entry. Unfortunately, the kit, super telephoto lenses, if you're buying pro cameras, I mean, it's super expensive, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I'll go through some of the categories, and this is really going to be the outline for the presentation in terms of what I'm going to show you. And this was a learning experience for me when I was putting these slides together. And I was thinking, okay, well, when I put together and I utilize space in my imagery, how do I do that? So I went back in my own portfolio and I was looking, over the past couple of years, and I didn't know this really. It just kind of happens in the field. But I looked at a lot of my images and I categorized them, and they clearly fell, many of my images, in each of these categories in terms of the reasons why I incorporate space in my wildlife imagery. And really, it comes down to maximizing color, bringing more life, in my opinion, to black and white images, demonstrating a sense of place. Most people think when it comes to space and environmental portraits, it's all about, showing the habitat of the animal. Where does the animal live? Where does the animal thrive and so forth? This is the first thing that comes to most people's mind, but there's other areas as well. Introducing lines and textures, adding more space in your images gives you the opportunity to complete more, as I was saying before, more complicated compositions, things that make you think, and obviously using lines and textures, powerful, powerful composition tools. Using minimalism. In order to add space into your image, you can actually add space, but add negative space to help create different types of shots, wildlife shots. So minimalism is huge when it comes to space photography. Intimacy as well. This is an interesting one. It seems to be a contradiction to space. We'll talk more about that when we get to that category. Naturally framing a scene, using nature to create framing in an image around your subject or your animal. Telling a story, showing how this animal connects with our world. especially in human elements, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You know, I see so many wildlife photographers, and I speak to them, and they'll go out of their way to hide the human elements in a story. If a bird is perched on, well, I haven't been to Texas, by the way, in many years, but I do remember when I was in Texas, I saw so many amazing scissor-tailed flycatchers. We don't have them really in the Northeast. I mean, they're strays if they show up. I mean, dynamite bird. I mean, just it's a showstopper. But I'm driving on the side of the road, and they're perched on the fences and the posts and so forth. And I was speaking to a lot of people down there, and like, oh, you don't want them on the fence post and whatnot. So people, wildlife photographers will go out of their way to kind of not they'll kind of hide that natural world, the human elements that we've introduced. And I like to actually show that and enhance that in some of my imagery, and especially in some of the space photography that I do, because we're living closer and closer together, and we're ultimately all part of this planet. What we introduce is, in some cases, their habitat that they live with every day. So I like to introduce those human elements. Storytelling, of course, is huge. And then unlocking the power of backlight. And we'll talk about that as well. So, this was a good learning experience for me as I was looking through my images. And this is essentially how I categorize what I've been doing over the past couple of years. Okay, so let's first talk about the introduction of color in space photography. It's not something that you think of immediately when it comes to space. It's like, okay, color, but it's actually quite significant. So when I take images and I'm showing space around the wildlife, one of the main attractions for me is the ability to introduce more color into the frame, right? So by introducing more color, you can play around with complementary colors. You can play around with contrast and tones, color temperature, and so forth. This particular image, this was a great blue heron. I took this in bald cypress swamp. A lot of people, when they see this image, by the way, they say to me, "Oh my God, you must have been in Louisiana or the bayou." This was actually taken in Delaware, not far from my house, probably like 40 minutes away. It's the northernmost bald cypress swamp in North America, in the United States, all in North America. It's a really unique place. I try to go there in the fall when the color is peak. I took this image from a kayak of a great blue heron. I was coming back actually. There was a little boat launch behind these cypress trees, and I shot this. I want to say 50 millimeter. I only had a 24 to 105 in my kit. I was just kayaking around, mostly taking landscape images. Thankfully, this is a place where a lot of visitors, there's a big campground behind there. You could see the cool tones and the smoke that's actually coming from campfires that you see on the right side of the frame. And they're just used to people, so you can get very, very close to these birds, and they actually don't mind. So I took this 50 millimeter, and I was able to give that perspective and show all of these bald cypress trees and some other trees really at the peak of fall color. And you have the warm tones in the trees, but again, also in the distance, because of the campfires, you get those cool blue tones. Now, if I had a 400, 500 millimeter and I was just zooming in on the heron, I wouldn't catch much of this color. But stepping back and looking at it and taking this with, yeah, at 50 millimeter, it introduces so much color, and frankly, the scene was just stunning. Looking at it, at first blush, it reminded me of being like in Kyoto or a Japanese garden. This image was selected as a grand prize winner at the French Nature Festival last year. And Big Picture also gave it a highly commended. It's been hanging, I think it's still there at the California Academy of Sciences out in San Francisco. I went to the opening. It was an amazing, amazing museum, and they had like a little gallery type thing. It was really cool. But again, stepping back, wider perspective, you can introduce so much more color. Here's an image. This is an underwater image. I took this, and I don't really specialize in underwater photography, but I had to try this. I was in Shetland, and some friends of mine run this nature cruise where you go out around the Isle of Noss, and these gannets, you get these diving gannets underwater. This was taken with a fisheye. I think it was I want to say it might have been an 8 millimeter fisheye. I think it was. So it was wild when these things were diving. And again, this image made it stand out for me was really the color, the cool tones on the bottom of the image, and then if you go north of the waterline, you can see the nos in the background, but it's all gray and it's fairly bland on top. So you kind of have that divergence from something bland to really rich in color. You have a couple gannets battling over some herring there, and then you see some others. They're underwater and they're all kind of going for the fish. So you see the competition. But when I look at this image, the action is there, but for me, it's stepping back and just looking at the color. That stands out for me most in an image like this.
Can I sneak in a question from
Sure.
Andy? The Gannett photo is just bananas. That's amazing. But he wanted to
Thanks.
know, how did you like that?
How did I like it?
Light it. Light it.
Oh, light it. Yes. So I wish I could show you the video clip of how we had this. We had the camera in basically this globe, and there were two strobes next to it. So we dipped the camera. I was actually not underwater for this. I was in the boat, and it's on a pole, and there's a trigger on top of the pole to release the camera. So these birds were not far, maybe a foot, if that, from the actual camera. Because it's a fisheye, it looks like there's much more distance, obviously. But yeah, so it was almost like playing a video game, clicking. And so there were two strobes on the side, and they lit up. I had to do some post processing on this. Because of the strobes, the water looked in the raw image, it was like almost green. But to my eye, when looking at that water when I was up there, it was much more, it had a bluish, more turquoise look to it. So I had to do some adjustments as it relates to the color, the tint of the water on that. But yeah, again, just, you know, adding more into the frame and, taking advantage of some of the rich color that you see. In this case, the color is being used to contrast the blandness on top of the frame, on top of the waterline. This was actually the gannet colony itself as we were taking the boat around. And again, what stood out to me, not only just incorporating the gannets, the cliffs, and you see obviously the nesting behavior, it's the color. There's subtle green and there's subtle orange tones. And if you look, and I would encourage you all to, if you haven't done this, grab yourself or always have a color wheel handy. Being able to spot complementary colors in the field is very important. Red and green are amazing colors. They go together fantastic in the frame. I look for, blue, gold, purple, gold, blue, yellow. You see some images. I know they're very popular. Um, Indigo buntings on sunflowers. You've all seen that image, right? Blue and yellow, complementary colors, right? So these are some of the things that just innately bring people's eyes to these images. And seeing the subtle red and the green tones, great complementary colors, as you'll see also in this next image. This was in Shetland, so I'm going to say great blackback gull, but I don't know. Some of the birders in here might have to correct me. I'm not too good on my UK gulls. I know there's similar, maybe it's lesser blackback because I know there's lesser blackback over there. But in any event, stepping back, adding the rocks, you've got the red and you've got you've got the red and you've got the green tones. Just one of my favorite color combinations when it comes to incorporating color in my photography. Black and white images. So we're really going the opposite of color now. We started at color, and now we're going to black and white or lack of color. Adding additional elements through incorporating more space in your images, that also really lets you put a few things in overdrive when it comes to black and white images. Texture and contrast. So you look at, and you've all seen really great images, black and white images of things like elephants, hippo, where the animals themselves have a lot of innate texture, right? In this particular image, you have the lion, but there's not a ton of texture in the lion, right? You don't see a lot of it. However, all of the palms around it and going looser, incorporating these adds texture to the shot, and it also helps with the contrast too. It adds more midtones. It adds midtones in the sense of I guess the luminosity you would say, but and then you have the brighter lion there, right? So it adds textures, it adds contrast, And it really gives you the ability, I think, to exploit what black and white photography does, especially when it comes to wildlife. This next shot that I have here, this is it's a Spanish Mustang. These are wild horses, and I know we had some. I think Andy, he's from North Carolina. They said
Mhm.
so. This was taken in North Carolina. This was taken in Corolla, which I don't advise going in August. It's like a super highway on the beach. I mean, there are like 4 lanes of beach traffic, literally on the sand. It was quite crazy. But in any event, we were all trying to get back to the entrance to get back on pavement. This was a late summer storm that was coming, and it was a monster storm. So I got out of the car, and again, I had a telephoto lens with me, and I was starting to take images of this horse as the storm was coming in with my telephoto. But then all of these clouds showed up, and this very foreboding storm cloud formed behind it. So I took this was I think I took this at like maybe 24 millimeter. I think I had my 14 to 35 lens on this. And let me just check. 14 to 35 millimeter this was taken at. So I took my wider angle out and I went vertical because I wanted to get the horse, obviously, and the kick was a plus, right? I took many images. This was my favorite because you'll see there's just like a little kick there from the horse, and then of course you have this anvil cloud or this crazy cloud that was forming behind it. The horse was still backlit, so it was good for the silhouette. But most importantly, what I wanted to introduce the textures of the storm cloud, right? And how they emanate from behind the horse all the way up to the frame. Uh, I wish I should have put in the slide some of the telephoto shots I took of the horse there. Nowhere is interesting, right? Because you basically see the horse, it's a silhouette, and you see some of the dune grasses, but you don't get the enormity of the scene and how awesome that storm was, right? When you look at this, you can just feel the storm and you could see the textures in there and you could see the contrast between some of the shadows, the horse itself is silhouette, and some of the highlights from the sun in the background. We were talking about Ambicelli before. Matter of fact, I think this might have been Craig in the background, which is one of the big tuskers. You can kind of see the tusk, but it was kind of in the distance. Obviously, the highlight were the zebra, but the whole point of the image was to show Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. When you're in Amboseli in Kenya, sometimes you'll be I know folks who've been there for a while, for multiple days, and they don't see Amboseli. It's hidden, or I'm sorry, Kilimanjaro. It's hidden. So in this case, it was getting exposed, and of course you had the texture of the mountain, and you had the clouds, and then of course you have the contrast of zebra right down in the bottom. So figured, okay, this is great. So I took a vertical to make sure I was able. I had a little bit more space even on top of it, but I wanted to make sure I incorporated Mount Kilimanjaro, which it was the first time seeing, and it was absolutely stunning. After hearing Toto mention it for so many years, if anybody's a fan of the song Africa, that was my second experience with Kilimanjaro. This was taken in the Falklands, and again, this was great to have as a black and white shot. You've got the curve or the line of these are Gentoo penguins. They were coming in from the beach and they were walking back to their nesting colony. They're just the cutest things, by the way, just amazing, amazing birds. And you could see it was a nice curve that they formed on the road. And this road is probably, you could see it's just all dirt. It's probably just been formed by them walking over this for thousands of years. Who knows? But you had their black backs and you had the white sides, right? So you've got great contrast there. And that was the purpose, right? How do I highlight the contrast? Obviously, shoot from behind, go black and white, but incorporate more birds, right? And the darker colors of the Gen 2s and then the white sides really differentiate them from the rest of the scene, which looks relatively flat, actually, when you look at the mountains and the sky, even though there's some depth there. What really separates in the frame is actually the birds in the background. Everything else feels like the background to me. It has like a bit of a 2D effect, but that's what I liked about it. Sense of place. So incorporating space in wildlife shots when it comes to the environment, this is the first thing people think of. It's like, yeah, show the habitat of the animal, right? show the habitat of, the bird, the bear, or whatever, and give the viewer, obviously, a sense of where that animal lives, where that animal thrives, um, what the preferred environment is. Many different opportunities you'll have in the field to show space in this type of way. This shot is this was taken in Lake Clark some years ago. This was Blonde Mom, I think was the name. They named the bears there. There's a few bears, and they named the bears. This was Blonde Mom, and she had two cubs, and she was walking through this field, and it was just absolutely stunning. Matter of fact, I think I took this close to the lodge, and she was just walking by, and it was a snapshot. But again, I mean, Alaska is so beautiful, and you have the line of trees in the background and the soft tones in the sky. It was just amazing to be there. Now, showing a sense of place, in my opinion, is obviously you want to demonstrate the habitat of the bird. You want to give your viewer a really good idea of where these animals can be found. This shot was taken wide angle uh, in Hermanus. This is the northernmost island in Shetland. Those images I showed you before of gannets, this was the same trip. So we ventured up to Shetland. The northernmost island is called Unst, which I think it's got a Nordic Viking kind of history. And puffins, like penguins, are actually very, they'll approach you. I mean, it's wild. I mean, most places in North America, as everybody knows, the birds, they fly from you. It's very hard. You need to have very good field craft to get to most of the animals close in North America and the United States. There's only a few places in the world that I've been where you really don't need much field craft other than just sitting still. This is one of those places. So I was just laying down on the edge of a cliff. I don't advise it if you're scared of heights, by the way. I tried not to look down, and these puffins would land and they would just kind of walk all around you. They were checking out my backpack, my photo bag. They'd nip at it. I mean, and they're super cute. But in any event, this individual showed up and was doing a wing flap here, and I was able to compose it. I went a little bit more wider. This is like a 16:9 ratio versus like a 3:2, which is your standard, 35 millimeter. But what I wanted to do is show the background, right? Show the island as it wraps around. Some of this, how aggressive the water is as it comes in. And of course, you've got that diagonal line up to it as it's flapping its wings. The sky was interesting. There was a lot of fog and stuff there. So you'll get decent light, but it's diffused even in some of the best moments that we had. So when it comes to being able to photograph certain birds at a wider angle, I've tried to do some different things from my standpoint because, like as I was just showing you with that puffin shot, I was able to lay there, and I had I think it was maybe my 24 to 105, but I had a wider angle lens, focal length, and I was just laying there, and the bird showed up, and he flew in, and he was right by me. You could never do that with a bird like this. This is a Louisiana water thrush. Obviously it's a warbler passerine bird. This bird's probably 6 inches from bill to tail tip, and it's extremely hard. You just can't get close to these birds with a wide angle lens. So this territory here, I've seen these birds for years and years. They come and they nest and they breed in this area every year. It's not far from my house. So I set up a remote camera trap here. This was triggered actually. And I was able to get this shot of the Louisiana water thrush. They like streams. What I loved about this composition was and this is one of its perches. They'd always come to this perch. I have images from even years prior with my telephoto on this same perch. I don't know why they like it. So I've used that experience and took advantage of some of the field craft to put together. Because if you're putting together a camera trap, you need to put it in a spot you think the bird's going to show up in, right? So in this case, I think, what was I at? So I was at F8. And the whole point of F8 is you want to make sure that you have enough depth of field because you're closer to the animal with your lens. You want to have enough depth of field to get the subject in focus. But I wanted to render the background slightly out of focus. I wanted to render it in the frame where you could see it, but have a nice soft diffusion to it. So, for instance, if I was at f16 or if I went much wider, I would have a lot more I'd have some straighter lines, some more focus on the background, which I didn't want. I wanted you all to get like a sense of where this place was, but at the same time, I didn't want all the branches and the greenery in the background to be distracting, right? And I think for any of the plant folks, I think that's skunk cabbage in the background. I could be wrong, or it's that or spatterdock, one of the two. I'm not too good with plants in that area. But so that was the idea when I was taking this image. And while we're on that subject, I think it's important to point out when you're shooting at wider angles, especially in these types of images that I'm showing you, you, your exposure isn't always the widest aperture, right? So when most people shoot with telephoto lenses, they're simply always at what, if you have a 600 f4, they're shooting at f4 most of the time. Or, if you're at 5.6, you're shooting at 5.6. Most wildlife photographers will shoot at the widest aperture or the most open aperture, if you will, to make sure that they have the fastest shutter speed, and they want, the out of focus in the background, right? And that's great for a lot of standard photography, like as I was talking before, the frame filling portraits that are most common. When you're shooting and you're introducing wider areas of space, it's not always that, right? So distance to subject, distance from the subject to the background, all these things come into play. So when I'm shooting in these types of environments, I could be shooting at f8, I could be shooting at f16, I could be shooting at f2.8 sometimes, and I'll show you some of those images as well. So it's not always the straightforward be wide open. Aperture is a huge variability when it comes to these types of images. This was another remote triggered shot, a camera trap I set up. That's a Virginia rail in a salt marsh not far from my house. And then you have the beautiful Phragmite growing up all around that. Again, the intention of this is to show a sense of place. And of course, these birds love salt marsh. There's mixed marsh here too. We have them in fresh marsh and salt marsh out here on the Eastern Shore. And they're absolutely stunning birds. When it comes to rails, Virginia rails are just, I think, when it comes to the color. King rails are almost there, but Virginia rail is a special bird for me when it comes to color. But again, that sense of space, showing that habitat where these birds live and thrive. Our favorite bird in North America, and they're kind of near and dear to my heart, the Canada goose. They get a lot of shame, but I kind of don't mind them. I live with them outside of my house all year round here, so they've become my buddies. But this was in Grand Teton, Oxbow Bend. Oxbow Bend, I think it is. This is the famous shot where everybody kind of pulls over and they take images. And I was taking images of this scene, which was so beautiful to me. This was in fall. It was obviously past peak. And these two Canada geese were swimming across. So they helped bring the image together. And again, that sense of place. Northern gannets shooting down, just hovering over crazy seas. And this was in Hermanus. Again, sense of place. And you see the out of focus bird down there in the background, which I thought was kind of a nice little add on. In this one, again, more shallow aperture. You still want to show the sense of place, but put focus on the bird. I'll at times choose a shallow aperture when I'm taking environmental images like this if my background could be distracting if in focus. So in this case, you have all the rocks, the hard lines, the edges. If everything was in focus, it would take away from the bird, the gannet, which is my subject in the upper right corner, which is just kind of hovering there in the wind. This was on the Snake River in Grand Teton. It was wild. It was one morning, and we were waiting. We saw this bull elk and its herd, and he was starting to push these elk across. And you've probably all heard of or know of Tom Mangelson, who's the famous photographer out there based in Grand Teton, Yellowstone area. His assistant was there. I met her and I was talking to her, and she knew obviously the area so well. And she said, "Hey, Josh, come with us. We've got a good spot. We think we know where they're going to cross." So I'm like, okay, if you're with Tom Mangles, I'm following you. You know your stuff. So I followed her, and we sat down at the side of the riverbank, and we were able to get this this elk crossing, which was so cool. It was just kind of amazing to see, and really the size of the herd crossing. And you could see the bull on the left side, and of course the first one crossed, and you could see they're moving up. And we had some strong backlight, and there was some fog coming off of the water, and it gave almost a painterly like effect, which I thought was pretty cool. But again, if I had a telephoto and I was just focusing on one of the elk, I wouldn't capture really the scene that was really happening there and unfolding. One of my favorite things to do, and I was talking a little bit about this when it comes to compositions, is incorporating textures and incorporating lines through the use of space. Um, Again, adding more components, I can't emphasize this enough. The more you're able to add into your frame, in addition to the animal or your subject, the more you're able to do with the composition. In this case, you can play around with textures, you can play around with leading lines, and I'll walk you through some of these images I think that demonstrate that. This is a snowy egret. I took this behind my house. I get snowy egrets primarily from late March, early April, all the way through to September, October. On the low tides, they'll come in and forward. So when it comes to one of my most photographed subjects, it's the snowy egret, and I just love them. This was a takeoff shot, and again, you have we call it saltbush, and you've got some phragmite, and there's some specks of trumpet flower in the background there. So we've got this is a hermit thrush shot. I took this not far from where I grew up in northern Pennsylvania. I go back in the spring because it's really amazing for songbird photography. There's some northern hardwood forest spots, some boreal bogs up there. You actually would think you're in Canada, believe it or not, but based on the elevation and whatnot, we get a lot of birds that are more northerly, but they're actually breeding in Pennsylvania. Blackpoll warbler's a good example, I think, and yellow-bellied flycatcher. These are birds you would associate with Minnesota, Maine, Canada, and so forth. Some of these birds actually breed in some of these areas. You don't think of them as having a breeding range as south as Pennsylvania, but they do. Obviously, this is a much more common bird, but it's the bird when it comes to northern hardwood forest for me, and that's the hermit thrush. It's a forest dwelling bird. They forage on the forest floor, and they have the most beautiful song. Now, when it comes to my bird nerd is going to come out, and I love bird song. I'd probably put the winter wren above the hermit thrush, but just a little bit. This song, obviously, if you've all heard it, it's so ethereal. And when you're walking through a spruce forest and you hear that, it's just magic. Uh, this particular composition, again, very loose. And the purpose of the composition when I put it together is using I believe that's a hemlock, an eastern hemlock, but the exposed roots coming from the trunk, those serve as a leading line in the composition. So you have the hermit thrush on the moss there, and then you have the leading lines of the roots coming down, right? They come down from the tree and they emanate through the frame. Uh, I always like to pick apart my work. I wish the scene didn't have that other hemlock trunk, the one that goes through the middle that you see there, but it's what it is. I wasn't going to cut it down. But I really loved the leading lines in this image and how it supports the bird. And again, being close and just getting a out of focus with an out of focus background and a hermit thrush, kind of boring, right? Incorporating different elements and using lines, much, much more interesting. This was taken behind my house here in the Eastern Shore. I want to say, looking at the bill, help me out here. I'm going to say hairy woodpecker on this. I believe that's a hairy, not a downy. Or am I? What do y'all think? I'm going to say it's a hairy, but what do you think,
I,
Linda?
I thought it was a downy, but we have downies. I'm not an expert at all, so um, I'm going to say downy just because I think he's so cute.
Yeah, it does look it looks small, right? Scale wise versus a hairy. I don't know. The bill looks a little bigger to me, but okay. So I'm going to go with you. We're gonna say this is a downy.
I'm probably wrong. I'm not a birder, Josh. I'm just a wannabe.
I okay. I think we'll go with downy, but yeah, I've always had sometimes trouble, when it comes to hearing the song. I think one's a descending and the other one doesn't descend, I think. But in any event, the star of this show, obviously you have the bird, the downy, but really the star for me is the tree. The tree is almost alive in this image when you look at the lines, right? It kind of hauntingly a little bit. But you have the branches that go all throughout the frame, go into the upper right, upper left corner of the frame, and others coming out like that. I played around with it's a minor crop, I guess. I played around with the crop, but I felt putting the bird in the center of the frame, or at least the trunk of the tree in the center of the frame, the loblolly pine, and the branches emanating out was the right call. But again, using the lines and adding a little bit more room around the bird, it really brings, I think, the image to life. The tree to me is alive. Canada geese. And this was in a bald cypress swamp, that one I was showing you, the great blue heron before. And again, it's the lines of the trees, right? The cypress trees going up and down, and the lines here just dominate the frame. And a matter of fact, people will look at this image, and some folks have said, "Where are the birds?" And I'm like, "They're in there. You have to look, you have to look slightly closer, but they are there." The color is helpful too. And what I did, I put the water line kind of at the 50% mark right in the middle of the frame. But it's obviously the lines and the trees and the color that really bring it together. The geese are actually just a nice little, in my opinion, it's a nice little nugget after you examine the frame. This is an American red star, and they always say bird on a stick, bird on a stick. But what a stick this was, or a branch, I should say, in sticks. I took this just recently. It was in the spring, and the bird was obviously perched and singing, and just the wispiness of these branches coming out, and the lines and the curves as they kind of go all throughout the frame. It's a bit chaotic, but I absolutely love the flow of this. I was able to show from the lower left corner of the frame and how the branches come out and they emanate throughout the frame. Bird's the star of the show here, but the branches are pretty close. Obviously, they help support and make the image, but I took this shot, and the bird was singing the other way first. And I'm like, and I'm like, oh God, if the bird only turned. And then I got a sing back, kind of a little bit of a look back. I'm like, okay, that's enough to balance it out. And I was able to go on that side to capture those branches. But again, it's the lines here, just and the lines that emanate due to the branches. It just really brought it to life for me. This is one of my favorite images I took in the spring. And this one really is, I mean, there's some lines in here, but for me, it's more about the texture. For the birders out there, Blackburnian warblers love spruce trees. They breed in spruce forests. They build their nests in spruce trees. In Pennsylvania, where they nest, we primarily have red spruce. These are red spruce. And what you'll see, there was some water, there was a rainstorm. Of course, when you're shooting in the spring, there's always rain, in and out, right? And things are fairly wet in May in the Northeast. So this shot was taken remote trigger. I added a pop of flash in here. And the reason why I did that, because the spruce branches, they were wet, and you could see what that flash did, right? It added all those little highlights. That's just water dropping, water coming off of it and droplets and so forth. Again, for me, it was all about the layering and the textures of the spruce branches, right? Of course, the Blackburnian is colorful enough, and it's such a gorgeous bird that it still can dominate the frame, even this small in the composition, but having the textures and everything to support it. This was one of my favorite warbler shots for many, many years. I love the Blackburnian warbler. Probably the prettiest warbler in North America. It's up there. I'd say Magnolia, Canada, Blackburnian. Those are like the big three for me. Another kind of shot, I mean, we have white-tailed deer, as everywhere in the eastern United States, and this shot was taken behind the house. I was on the kayak, and I live near a cove off of Eastern Bay as part of the Chesapeake Bay. And the white-tailed deer population, they come down and they'll drink at night. Now, the water's brackish, which is a little surprising, but maybe it's fresher than what I think. So they'll come down and drink at night. This buck was walking through the Phragmite, and again, I didn't. I had some images where it came out in the open and it was just there and drinking, but this one stuck out more than anything because you could see the frag I call it. It was bending in the antler, and you get that nice curve that goes around, and it kind of wisps up, and then you have all those surrounding busy textures that help camouflage the white-tailed deer, but it also adds to it too. There's a little bit of mystery here, and but the eye is not really. There's a little bit going across the eye on the left side, but the eye's there, and you have that little tongue, the little tongue lick, salt lick, I'll call it. But in any event, textures, and you get some of the curves and the lines here. Another huge thing when it comes to space, I would say the second most popular composition or approach to using space and wildlife shots outside of what I was talking before on the sense of place, it's probably minimalism, right? So, just by definition, in order to have a shot that's minimalist, you need to have some space around your subject. This was a ringneck duck in Yellowstone. I took this in Lamar Valley. We were actually looking for otters and no luck, but this ringneck duck was floating by. What I really liked about this shot, so I pushed my exposure and I overexposed to render the whites obviously bright, super bright, but it renders essentially little to no data in the whites. So maybe I was +2 and +3 on my exposure. I'd have to go back and look, but it renders the whites in this case, the water, just super bright white. Brings attention to the subject. What I liked about this shot is it's actually kind of crazy because when you look at it, you think the water is the ice and the ice is the water, but it's actually the opposite. So it's kind of cool. It kind of plays with your mind a little bit. Played with my mind when I first looked at it. I'm like, wait a second, I thought it was in the water, but it is. But you have to look at it quickly. This is another good example of, pushing. And let me talk a little bit. People, there's a lot of terminology around these days. You typically hear high key and you hear this other term called low key. High key is what I was just showing in that previous shot and what you see here and what you'll see in a few other shots. Again, pushing the exposure to basically render the whites bright white, no data in the whites. And what it does is it allows and sets the stage for your midtones and your darks in your frame. It works best when you're on a cloudy day, when you have clouds in the sky, so you render the clouds bright white. Or as you just saw in the previous image, that ringneck duck was floating through the water. You do it with water on a cloudy day. This here, of course, is a short-eared owl on really, I call this tree is like a living fossil. It was an old loblolly pine, not far from where I live, and of course, rising seawater, a lot more saltwater intrusion is killing a lot of these pine trees. This thing was also shifted by the wind over the years, so it's like just a big piece of driftwood. I love the tree, just the curve and everything else. So this owl was sitting on it and just kind of surveying. Below this tree, it's just extensive Spartina marsh. There's like some rushes and stuff like that, and it's in the wintertime, so they're hunting mice, voles, and all that other jazz. But uh, pushed the exposure and really made it a really cool high key image. Some of these images, I always, I don't know if there's any fans of folks who know art really well, but when I see some of these high key images, it reminds me of almost like Japanese silk art, some of these high key images. It's very, very attractive to me. And it's something that I definitely look for. If it's cloudy out or you don't have strong golden light, try to play around with high key. And again, it's like a studio in a way, right? Because you're limiting almost all of the distractions other than what you want the viewer to focus in on. In this case, it's the owl, but just as much as the owl, it's the tree. Probably a half mile from that shot, I came in. This is the same area, great blue heron, again, high key, minimalism. Those reeds there, the reflection of the reeds actually were, in my opinion, almost more important than the reflection of the heron in this shot. And they help balance out the great blue heron that you see on the right side. I didn't go 50-50 in terms of everything above the waterline on the top half, everything below on the bottom half. I kind of moved it around a little bit because I wanted to incorporate all of those reeds. I didn't want to cut the reeds off on the top so that to help. I thought it just looked much cooler without the reeds being cut off. And then you have the bird a little lower to help balance it. But again, adding some space, adding some minimalism around there. It again, it has that like Japanese silk art. I mean, it has a painterly like look, and it eliminates distractions. Very, very powerful tool if you're in the field and you're like, you know what, this is a cloudy day, the sun's not out, I'm going to pack in. You may not want to do that. Similar concept right behind my house. This was an osprey. I took this last spring. I think this is a persimmon. It's on its way out. Each year it's got less and less leaves, but it's launching at the wing position, and you could see the talons just the position of the bird was really cool. I really liked it. And adding, blowing out the background, pushing the exposure, puts then the focus also on the darks and the midtones of that persimmon tree. And also incorporating the tree, while it is minimalistic, it does add some color in there too. We were talking about color before. You get some greens and some reds and whatnot. But again, if I had just a in your face shot of the bird launching, sure, that would be kind of cool. This to me is much prettier. Also, if I'm selling prints or if I'm licensing images outside of the wildlife photography, and those are most of the people. I don't know what you all think, but when it comes to folks who buy my images, whether they want prints or whatnot, or places who, license images, my audience, they're not wildlife photographers. Most wildlife photographers who are hardcore photographers, they're printing their own work or they want their own work on the wall, which I completely understand. But when it comes to selling my work, it's mostly folks who just appreciate things that aesthetically look nice to them and they're not photographers on their own. That's the majority of my audience that buys my prints. So it's images like this that stand out more for them versus if it was just an in your face kind of osprey shot with the eyes. That normally doesn't go above the couch, but this can maybe go in the living room or a den or something like that. Similar concept, high key, great blue heron. I like kind of, I went more pano on this and the green, I guess that's Spartina, maybe in some other things, Phragmite, offset the great blue heron on the side. But if I, for instance, decided to have a slower shutter and I rendered a lot of my whites darker and more in that gray tone, you would have seen a lot more texture in the water. You would have seen a lot more distractions and it wouldn't have this clean look. It wouldn't have this minimalistic look. Same thing here, same concept. Canada geese. Here we are. This is right behind my house. I took this off my dock in the wintertime. It was so cold. And these birds were taken off. I don't know about you all, but processing things change over time. You want to try different things. I'm on this image border kick now where I do my image and I put that little border around it. I don't know. It's gives it a Polaroid look. I'm not sure whatever it is, but for whatever reason, to my eye now, I'm playing around with these image borders. I pay the price for this because sometimes if I'm submitting the image for something or whatever, I can't have the borders or anything, and then I have to go back and take them off. It's a pain, but I've been doing these recently. Another example of minimalism, but not using high key, it's just showing a lot more space in the frame and a lot of, kind of more empty space, less context is, stuff like this. It doesn't always have to be high key. It doesn't always have to be low key. And this was taken in Alaska. This was a brown bear on a spit. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Alaska. When the tide comes in, it's unlike the East Coast where I'm at. I mean, it comes in fast and it comes in quick. The tide was coming in that morning, and we had a beautiful sunrise in the distance, like these pink pastel tones. And this brown bear wanted these glaucus wing gulls off of that spit, and you could see he's kicking them out. What's interesting about this shot is the expressions of the bird, the wide open gape on the bear is mimicked on the birds, which I thought was cool. It's like they're all screaming. Minimalism again. This was in North Carolina in Corolla. This is a Spanish Mustang, and the color contrast was really cool in this shot, and the textures in the clouds. But again, there's not a lot going on outside of the horse and the beach. There's not a lot of busyness here. To me, it's still a minimalistic shot. And if you look closely, you could see those little pepper flakes. Those are sanderlings. So you you can't forget about the sanderlings. I saw this show the other day. It was like this short cartoon called Piper. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. It won one of these. Maybe it was an Academy Award. I don't know. It was this little short clip. It was like 10 minutes long, like a Disney type thing of Sandpiper. They were Sanderling. It's the cutest damn thing. If you ever want to look, I think it's called Piper. This was shot behind my house. Amazing sunset. You had, the reflections. This was just after sunset, twilight, and these just deep, deep, rich reds. This bird, I call him the judge. He cleans up in the back. He's a great hunter. But again, just showing the sky. There's a lot of emptiness here, but there's still content, right? I mean, it's minimalistic. It's not high key. There's a lot of open space, but I think it just works, even though that bird is that small. Intimacy. Uh, you would think, okay, introducing space means, you're going to have all these vistas and you're going to have all this stuff, but you can also bring your audience close to your subject in some of these shots and how you can compose them. And the intent when I do images like this, I almost want um, I almost want the viewer to back up a little bit, be like, oh, wow, there's that sense of connection, that sense of intimacy. You can do that with wider angle shots as well. But you can also, because you're shooting so close to this was a camera trap shot, by the way. I was not petting this black bear, although he's super cute. You could show also because you're shooting with a wider focal length and they're even though they're close and it feel you can also demonstrate the background here and what's going on so you get that sense of environment around it. You're able to do two things at once. This shot, the reason why I was able to set up this camera trap, I got many bears on this area. This was on my uncle's property. It's kind of a mucky boggy area behind there that you really can't tell, but that fallen log the bears use because they don't want to walk through that boggy area. So they all cross over that log. So I set up a camera in different aspects. And I've gotten all kinds of things there: fisher cats, raccoons, black bear, of course, and even barred owls actually through my camera trap. Here's another one at a different perspective. That same log. They're just so cute. So again, I mean, you can actually have the subject, even though you're showing some space there, dominate the frame too. And this is another good tool, I think, where you can create that intimacy, create that connection. You can feel close to your subject, but you still have space around it. This oven bird, this was another camera trap shot. This won the Silver Award in Bird Photographer of the Year a couple of years ago. Again, small bird, 6 inches maybe. And the whole point, which was unique about this photo, is to show its habitat, but also have the bird dominate the frame, right? The bird is, the major portion of this frame. And while it's so small, it actually takes up a large portion of the frame. So it gives you a whole different perspective on it. This was when I was in Alaska on the tundra. This was a Pacific golden plover. I was just laying there shooting a northern wheat ear, and this bird came in and he noticed me and he kind of flapped his wings and took off. But how cool was that, right? I mean, and this was taken, I don't know, maybe 100 millimeter, maybe less than that. It was pretty awesome. This is a black skimmer chick. I was walking on a barrier island off of Virginia, and I almost stepped on this bird. I was like, "Oh my God!" And it wasn't like a protected area. You know how the birds are or whatever. I was just walking and I was looking, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" And it was just laying there in the sea rockets. They, I guess, like fawn and whatnot. They plump down if they see somebody. So I quickly just got down really quick and I took a shot and I picked up and walked away. I didn't want to stress the bird anymore. But the purpose of showing an image like this is when you're using a wide angle lens. I think I had maybe a 14 millimeter on me when I took the shot. When you're using a wide angle lens like this and you're close to your subject, you can exaggerate things, right? So things get exaggerated because, there's depth of field and you're using a wider focal length. The whole purpose of this shot was to show really the bill, right? Black skimmer chicks, that even young like this, you could see the bill is coming out. So it was pretty wild. And this thing is so cute. Jaegers, if you don't need to get close to these guys, they come to you. They're very territorial birds. In North America, this was in Alaska. We have, long-tailed Jaegers, parasitic Jaegers, Pomeranian Jaegers. This is a long-tail, gorgeous. They're like terns, and they've got these two stringers in the back. But they're very territorial. So when you're walking across the tundra, you're birding, you're shooting, they will just dive bomb you and come right at you. So I was just standing there out of 24 to 105. It was really cool because it's, the closer stuff probably when he nipped my hat was the out of focus things I didn't catch, but really cool. This was in the Falklands. These are rockhopper penguins. They were coming back and coming up these cliffs. They were out fishing and then they come in and they climbed up. I mean, again, as I was saying, Falklands, puffins, and Shetland, there's certain areas you can go where the birds just don't care. And you can almost pet them, and it's just a crazy experience. And these rockhoppers were coming by me. The one went on his belly, and it was just super cute. Again, it gives you that sense of closeness, but at the same time, you've got the wider scene there. My only complaint was I wish we had more textures in the clouds that day and whatnot. There's some empty space up there, but it was really cool. Winter Wren, uh, my opinion, the best singer, the best song in the forest in North America, in my opinion. But again, there's that. It's a small bird, but you can still create with certain compositions that sense of intimacy and make them a more dominant part of the frame. Natural framing. This is something also that when you're taking shots and you're adding more elements into your imagery, always look for natural framing. This is something I look for, and it's just kind of like in my DNA now. When I'm shooting certain things, I'm like, how could I frame the subject, right? Whether it's a bird or anything really. So in this particular case, this was shot in the wintertime. I was talking about high key exposure for minimalism. Push my exposure. I rendered the whites super bright, no data in the whites. And the purpose for that, though, in this particular shot was not to create minimalism, but the purpose of it was to frame this northern flicker, which, as you could see, the branches wrap around and they kind of arch nicely around the bird. They don't intersect with the bird's belly or face. There's some intersection by the tail. I didn't think that was too distracting. But you have, and it causes some cool chaos and busyness in the frame, but it naturally frames the bird. And I always think shots like this add a lot of interest and it gets people thinking too. And it makes folks study the image a little more. This is kind of, just nature's way of, capturing a shot or framing a shot. Similar concept here. This was on the Madison River in Yellowstone a couple years ago. And we were driving down, and there were I'm sorry, they are trumpeter swans. I was going to say tundra, trumpeter swans. This particular individual, there's also one behind it. And we were just taking close up shots of it. We didn't have a low perspective, and the shots from where we were just shooting down with a telephoto, they were kind of bland, right? You had the reflection. You could maybe put it in the, upper right side of the frame and a little bit, but it wasn't doing anything for us. So I'm like, okay, let me frame this. So what I did, I just simply zoomed out. I got a wider lens and I used two of the pine trees to frame it. The pine that goes across, actually, I didn't mind because it splits the frame up. You still see the tops of the trees, of course, but it also adds a little bit more of a smaller compartment where you could look down and see the trumpeter swan. So just a different way of shooting and just trying to be creative versus just taking those standard zoomed in shots of the swans. Now, again, I like to critique my own shots. If I had to do this in hindsight, I would have shot this. I would have stopped down much more or did a composite because the trees are out of focus, right? So the trees that I have framed on each side, I would have liked them sharper. So in hindsight, and we all look at things and we think about how we can do things better. And, that helps us as we move forward, as we continue to shoot. This was during fall, mallard pair. My podcast host, Rob, we were talking about him, Rob Reed, he's English. He says mallard, and he sounds so much better than mallard, by the way. I always kind of bust him over that. But here's a mallard pair. And really the framing is the tree, right? So you have the fall color up there, fleeting fall color. But the tree, and you look at all those branches coming down, it almost acts as an umbrella, comforting and coming over both of the ducks. And then, of course, down here, I know we're talking about framing, but also what helped, you kind of have that umbrella-like effect over the mallards. But then you have these lily pads, which act as a leading line from the lower left corner, and they kind of lead a diagonal. So they lead your eye also. Whether it's the framing from the branches or the lily pads, they bring your eye to the pair of mallards, if you will. Same thing, framing here. I was walking, this is a popular little nature reserve not far from where I grew up. I've been going there for years. And here we are, Canada goose, one of my favorite subjects, by the way. And great blue herons too. They don't get as much love as they should. But I was walking down this trail and this goose was foraging out in the open. The light was hitting the goose, but there was a lot of foliage in the way. So again, I added much more to the frame. I went vertically, and I took advantage of really what you could see, that light pocket there, right? So you have all of the foliage, you have the tree above it, and it kind of comes down kind of in an arc, and you've got that pocket. So this obviously frames the goose. Way more interesting in my opinion, as opposed to if I laid down on the ground, I took a 600 out and I shot a tight picture of the goose's head feeding or eating the grass, right? It really wouldn't be of that much interest. This to me is much more interest. Human elements, and this is what I was talking about before in the intro. I think it's really important that we capture human made materials or just elements of our own world, things that we create on this planet, because they intersect with the wildlife no matter where we go. We're living closer and closer to animals. The population is expanding. Unfortunately, our wildlife population is not expanding in most cases. So there is that encroachment, and you see that more and more often. So I try to document whenever both of our worlds collide, and I think it can actually be aesthetically pleasing. This was taken in North Dakota, blue-winged teals everywhere. The they call it the pothole region. The lots of blue-winged teal. I think that's their main breeding ground. And we saw them floating around this idyllic farm, Plainview Farm, it's called. The barn was just super cool. So again, I put some rush grasses. I don't know what type of rush that is, and you could see them kind of coming up on the left side of the frame. But of course, you have the blue wing teal. But that barn is so damn cool, right? So if it were just the ducks, okay. But having that barn in there, I think just really adds to it. So I'm like, oh, I got to get the shot like this with something around that barn because it was really pretty. This was taken in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago. This was actually at Union Station in Washington, D.C. And this snowy owl, it's a she came down. She was a young bird. And every night she would fly in and hunt rats and pigeons, unbeknownst to most of the people coming out of the train station in Union Station. And everybody knew she had a pattern, so most people caught on. And I went one night, and most of the photographers were trying to get her like in flight or swooping down or eating something. I preferred a looser perspective and incorporating part of the building. I did some research. This dude didn't really stick out. I'm like, I wonder who that is. Well, I did some research. It's Archimedes, by the way, for what it's worth. So before she flew, she was perched for a while on top of Archimedes on Union Station. So again, just something different, right? How many snowy owl images do we see where the bird's on the tundra, or the bird's on the beach, or the bird's in the snow? I'm like, I'm never going to get a snowy owl on the head of Archimedes again. So you got to take advantage of that. If you see these elements, try to capture them. Behind my house, there's a old pier that's there was a ferry that used to come across the bay and it would drop people off in my hometown where I live. That's not hasn't been used since the 50s, but common grackles nest all over these piers, which I thought was really cool. High key exposure, a little bit of a Hitchcocky in there. I got the one flying in the upper right corner. Same area, backlit, but again, incorporating the piers. This used to support a building, a railroad station, a ticketing station. There was a whole building complex around here. These are laughing gulls in silhouette. And if you look closely, there's some fishermen here on the pier on the left side of the frame. So it's almost as if the birds are kind of looking down at the fishermen. They're probably much better fishermen than the fishermen. I've seen laughing gulls in action. This is a platform behind my house. Some of my neighbors and folks in town, they put together and requested and they built an osprey platform. And most ospreys, you all know, they nest on these man-made, these human-made artificial platforms, but they thrive on the Chesapeake Bay for the most. But this year's been a tough year for them due to the menhaden decline, but they typically thrive here. So I was able to use that, but most importantly, the sun was setting, so I put that sunball right in between them. I love turtles. I should photograph turtles more often. They're difficult sometimes to photograph. I was taking photos of this turtle. This is a painted turtle, Eastern painted, and they come out obviously in spring to lay eggs. This turtle must have laid eggs somewhere, and it was making its way back to the little canal there. And I was taking some shots. Had my macro lens out, and of course, the whole point was to show the turtle in the environment. And this couple went by, and I'm like, oh, here come the lovebirds. And I'm thinking they're going to photobomb me. And, so they're like, hey, what are you doing? I was chatting with them. And they started walking away. And I'm like, oh, this is great, actually. I took a number of shots. They actually make this shot. So again, when you look at an image like this, I think of, okay, well, we're sharing spaces here. This turtle's trying to get back to the water. It's a path that the turtle needs, and it's a path that they need. So they really brought the image together. I wish they were holding hands and were maybe a little closer over to the right, but I wasn't going to direct them. It was already too late for that. Storytelling. I'll go through some of these images quickly. Again, you want to tell stories of your subjects, and the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, is adding space and adding around to help tell that story. This is a shot of a gannet. Gannets, when they put together their nests, they use a lot of human-made materials, fishing nets, and so forth. And sometimes it can be dire, as you can see for this bird, right? So it's actually hanging on a line, unfortunately. You could see it was even being pecked and whatnot. But what's so powerful to me about this scene when I looked at it, certainly the bird is hanging, but what's equally as powerful is all of the birds around it were going about their business and just moving on, right? So they're, nesting, they're trying to thrive around things. And it just goes to show the spirit on some of these birds on how they need to essentially survive. And they're surviving by different rules they did not evolve into. So if I would have shot this just that bird hanging there, fine. But it's much more powerful to see the birds around it. Same thing here. Bird in flight, wider angle. It's about showing the colony below and where it belongs to the community. The relationship between the mother white-tailed deer and her fawn, protecting the fawn, and showing the atmosphere and what they're doing with the water. That was behind the house. Sora, interesting enough, they're mostly found in cattail marshes, freshwater swamps and marshes. I've done some studying on these birds, and I've actually seen them actually forage outside of some of these cattails and these thick marshes. This was an example to show that they're not always limited in terms of where they forage. And I think this might be the last one, the backlight area. When you take an image, this was a bear in Alaska. Backlight, of course, because of the breath was cool. But when you're taking images and you're adding space for backlighting and more dramatic lighting scenes, it's great because instead of just focusing in on the animal, and you get normally most people do that, they get the rim light, right? If it's a bear, you get the fur. If it's a duck, you get maybe some of the plumes and whatnot. But if you step back and you create a larger scene, you can get a sunball, you can get other things in the environment. This is a merganser, a common merganser. He's stepping out of the frame, which I thought was kind of cool. And he got his little Sex Pistols mohawk there. And I thought he was kind of cool. And of course, you have the webbed foot that's up. But again, it balances off the sunball, balances it. Stepping back, this is a great egret. I named some of my birds in the back. That's GE. He's a good friend of mine. He walks all around me, doesn't care. He comes in late summer, actually. Some of these birds migrate further north at the end after their breeding season. But again, just stepping back and adding more space for the backlighting. These are king penguins. This was in the Falklands. We had this dramatic sunrise. I was laying on the beach. I'm like, oh my God. And these birds came right in front of me. I was shaking because I'm like, I have to capture this. I have to capture this. And I think I got this with a 70 to 200. And I added a little pop of flash on it because they're very reflective birds, obviously, right? So, it was enough to light them up, but I was able to have then a quicker exposure so I didn't blow out the colors in the background. This was in the Mara. These were Impala on the ridge. Again, I could have gone in close and just gotten the silhouette of probably the bull Impala because that's where most people will go to because they have the horns. But going back, you get the incredible textures and the color in the sky and the backlight, and you get the rest of the herd. What stuck out for me is that there's separation between each one of the animals for the most part, and you get the little baby there, which is cute if you look closely. And I want to do very quickly before we wrap up on some myth busting with space. I was talking about this before. Space is a relative term, right? So you don't have to live in Grand Teton. You don't have to live in Glacier. You don't have to live in Texas, even though everything's bigger in Texas. You can live anywhere and take great images with space. Incorporating space in your image doesn't have to be these beautiful, awesome mountain vistas. It can only be a couple of feet. But you can still really add content and make that image much more interesting. I'm going to show you some images that I've taken, and these are images taken with telephoto frames, right? This shot was a telephoto frame looking down at a puffin, and the foliage around it had a jungle-like feel actually to it. And I thought, I'm going to butcher this. If anybody knows French, you'll laugh at me, but there's a painter, Henry Rousseau, right? He was famous for painting these types of things. It reminds me of that kind of scene when I saw it, and it was kind of unique. But again, only a couple of feet around the bird, telephoto lens, but it added an element of texture and added a different element. And that's still space and that's still critical. So let me go through a few telephoto images for you. 600 millimeter, this was a least bittern. Very secretive birds, as you all birders know, they're very hard to come across. I was able to find this one perched in a salt marsh, and I was able to get it right in between, and I got the focus on the eyes. But again, while it's a super telephoto shot and all of the reads around or out of focus, it still shows the environment, right? So you're talking about a very small area, but I'm still able to demonstrate how these birds interact with the vegetation around them, what their behavior is like, and where they live. And I didn't need a wide angle vista. Great blue heron. This was taken behind my house. This picture won in the National Wildlife Federation last year. I was very pleased with it. There was like 29,000 images, and this was the birds category winner. And I was proud of it because I took it right behind the house. 600 millimeter, sun was setting, and it just lit up this bird gray. And you could see the talon, how the talon is positioned was that stuck out. That was that cool little nugget for me. And of course, the textures and the loblollies and whatnot. 600 millimeter still shows the environment of the bird. Same with this elk. This was in Pennsylvania, believe it or not. It looks like it'd be out west, but there's an elk herd in Pennsylvania. This snowy egret I took in the back, that's an old boat hole and behind it. And it was all busted up and it's been sitting there forever. But it's the boat hole incorporated that really makes it and adds an element to it, not just the snowy egret. Elk in fall, super telephoto, leopard telephoto. But again, I was able to incorporate, even though I was shooting with a telephoto, the tree and the curves and the lines as it was eating on. I guess it's an impala. Most of what they eat everything seems impala, 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 or Thompson's gazelle. Kentucky warbler, telephoto shot, super telephoto shot. But I was still able to incorporate. These are more bushy ground nesters. They're always in vegetation and whatnot. The light was just great on this particular bird. I love them. One of my more favorite southern species of warbler, but still you can see the environment and you get an idea of the types of vegetation these birds like to hang out in. Clapper rail, weirdest thing. I'm on the bay. This was shot not far from my house, and it froze over for a couple of weeks this past January. We had a really cold winter, and this was cool because you see the gut. This is actually a muddy gut in a salt marsh, but it's all frozen over. And I really like the curve there. So again, showing some space, showing the environment, but a long lens. And that is it. Sorry for adding all of the pictures in here. I hope I didn't go too far. I went over a little bit. So my
No need,
apologies.
no, no need to apologize at all. Okay, can I put some questions in front of you?
Sure.
All right. Let's start with Jan's question. She wanted to know, was the Alaska brown bear image at Silver Salmon Creek Lodge?
Absolutely. And it's some of the best food I ever ate, by the way. They had a chef there. I don't know if it's still true. This was in 2019, I think it was before the pandemic. And the food was incredible there. The food was almost as good as the shooting the bears, by the way. If anybody wants to go, the food's excellent.
Okay, so Andy's question is for the turtle and the couple, is that a 15 millimeter macro lens?
Um, it's a good question. I think it was. I think it was, yes.
Okay. Um, Sorry, I closed my screen here. Um, Mika's question is the lighting on your subjects is always beautiful. Do you do some of that in post-processing to bring that out?
What I'll do in post processing won't, I'm not a heavy post processor. Some folks, they kind of want to make love to the image for hours. I'm not like that. I like to go in, boom, boom, boom. I kind of have my thing. Sometimes what I'll do, I'll lighten the subject a little bit of dodging and burning. I'll do that, but it won't look much different from the original capture. So most of the lighting I get is in the field, but again, I will add like a vignette, and sometimes I will add a little. I'll dodge the face of the bird a little bit, or the animal, my subject, whatever it is, to make sure I bring the eyes in the focus there. When it comes to post processing for everybody, the best thing and the most important thing I think you can do is to learn how to pleasingly dodge and burn, right? Because you want to lead the viewer's eye throughout the frame how you want it to go. In my opinion, as the author of that, that's your work. So the other stuff, contrast and color, and that's all important. But dodging and burning is it's very underrated.
And this is from Daniel. I think this is Daniel Gomez. I'm not sure. But Daniel wants to know, how often are you going out for photography? Do you go out a few times a week, or are you mostly just doing planned trips to other states or countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. So normally every spring I'll go up to Pennsylvania for a little bit of for normally 4 or 5 days. I'll shoot in the spring, and I will take a planned trip here and there. I mostly shoot on the weekends. I'm thankful enough where I live, and this is how much I love wildlife. Part of the reason why I bought my place is because I'm close to wildlife. So I strategically live near where I can photo. So I shoot a lot basically in my backyard. I kayak and I shoot back here almost every night when it's nice. So that's where I take the majority of my imagery, and then I'll take some trips here and there with friends.
Yeah. Well, having it in the backyard makes it fewer excuses to not get out, but it
Definitely.
makes it easy. And you get to practice on those same subjects over and over and over. And you just build your portfolio of one bird, of
Yeah.
every kind of scene you can get. And um, Greckles, that's what I have a lot of. They get a little old to practice on, but it makes a difference that when I'm out and about in some place that I'm only going to go to once, I've got a little bit of experience shooting the same bird over and over.
Yeah. And they're a declining species. It's a common bird, but it's actually a declining species. Yeah, you wouldn't know it, but it
Yeah,
is.
no, you wouldn't know that in my backyard. They're thriving here. All right. Before I let you go, I want to thank you for giving us your time. I know it takes a little bit to put together presentations, and gosh, I loved it. I just loved it so much. All right. Are there any projects that you want to plug? Anything that you're working on, or do you do workshops? Do you do mentoring? Anything that we need to know?
Yeah, let me just say first off, thank you for having me, Linda. And I hope this was enjoyable for everybody. Hopefully you took something away and you'll have my information on there. If anybody has any questions or anybody needs anything, please feel free to reach out. I love to share information and thank you all for taking the time first off. I would recommend if you all are interested, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. I do mentoring. If anyone's interested in that, please reach out to me. My contact information is in the slide deck. I'd be happy to work with you. I haven't started doing workshops. I will start doing that eventually as I career transition, hopefully sometime in the near term. I want to do photography full time. I do not. I'm not a full time photographer. This is my passion outside of my career, but hopefully it will be one day.
Yeah, I see it in your future. All right, Josh. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm not gonna lie, I got three people texting me during your presentation. Please invite him back. So I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but know that's coming.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to.
All right. Next week, Dennis Kelly will be here to do an image review and share his thoughts in his presentation, The Art of the Subtle Fix. And until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.